Amen.
I'm studying this week for where we're going to go through today. And to me, it's one of the most frustrating words. And having heard that song makes it even more frustrating. So, you'll understand in a bit. Oh, it's good to know the times and the seasons. We're coming up on the new year, coming up on Passover. We're 3 weeks away. I believe it's the 15th of April, something along those lines. I don't know if you know that 30 days before Passover is another feast. I don't know if you know that. This past week, Wednesday and Thursday, we just had one of the later feasts in the Bible. It's by the name of Purim. And if you know the word Purim, you know immediately we're going to Esther today. But before we get to Esther, Esther to me is one of the most frustrating books. It just is. No, because it's one of the few books in the Bible that doesn't name God at all. And most people would use that as their jumping off point. We've got a book that doesn't use the name of God at all. And it's one of the two books named after a woman. We got Ruth and Esther. And if you were to look at those two books, we've got the idea of the song of love, and the song of redemption. We're just going to jump. Kinsman Redeemer. There we go. That's the word. The song of the Kinsman Redeemer. And we get to Esther, and it's the song of providence. It's the idea that behind everything going on in the world, God is making sure his plan is fulfilled, that everything he does, he's pushing towards the end of his work. And amen. And you can go through the entire story and get we can go through many different topics in the book of Esther. We can start looking at the comparison between Joseph and Mordecai. And in doing so, we then can compare Mordecai to Jesus. We can go through the topics of looking at the cross and how the cross was originally planned for as destruction of Jesus, and then the very cross that was used for the judgment and destruction of Jesus was then turned around on his enemy.
Yes.
And so the destruction that the enemy used to destroy his enemy was turned back around on him, and upon it was he hung.
Amen.
We go through all of the spiritual lessons in Esther. But today we got to go through the human one, which makes it frustrating. So in order to get to the human lesson in Esther, we got to go to Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept. We know anything about this psalm? This is a psalm describing them being carried captive away after the destruction of Israel and leading captive into the 70-year captivity of Babylon. And we have, in the middle of judgment, one of the most conflicting reactions to it, because it both highlights the significance and importance of what's going on, but also highlights the fact that the people who are in the middle of recognizing the significance of what they have are showing that they didn't really have what they thought they had. So by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept, when we remembered Zion, when we remembered the promise of God, when we remembered the fulfilled promise of God. Because remember, this is way after they had entered into the promised land. This is way after David. This is way after Solomon. Not only have they gone in and received the blessing of the land, they had received the blessing of the ministry of David. They had received the blessing of the Temple of Solomon. And we're talking about after blessing, after the fulfilling of promise. No, we're talking about a people who were not just identified by his name, but had been called out, had been separated, had been holy, and had been fully blessed by their husbandman, by their God. And they had long since rebelled. They had long since made a mockery, disdain of that which had been given to them. And so it was in the process of being taken away from them. And as they're walking away and they see Zion in the background, they're beginning to see what it is that they've lost. They're beginning to see what it is that's being taken away from them. And so they hang their harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. For they that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they that wasteth required of us mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion. One of the most precious things, your life, your song, your passion, your love. And their enemies wanted to make it a mockery, just a source of entertainment for them to laugh in derision at the God who could not save them from their might. And so we have a people that are in the middle of facing what's been stolen from them, what God has removed from them, the good gift of God and his presence and his protection and his joy and his peace. And because of their rebellion, God's in the process of stripping it all away. And the very last thing they see is the goodness of God, not just no longer being available to them for the next 70 years, but the testimony in the world of it being seen as a mockery and a shame and a derision. And that was a step too far. They would not allow the good songs of Zion to be seen in such a light. So they hung their harps upon the willow tree. And I can't remember how many times I've been asked this question. Well, Pastor, was this a good thing or was this a bad thing? Well, let's keep reading. For there they carried us away captive, required of us a song, and there they wasted us, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, Sing us the songs of Zion. So they hung their harps on the willow, and they wouldn't do it. They would not allow the worship of their God to be used as mockery, to be seen as just a carnival show, which is part of the frustration because Purim has turned into a carnival. A carnival that is required, some would argue with that, or is expected for you to get so drunk you can't tell the difference between two sentences. That's what it's become. It's just a carnival show. Now, the end result of the goodness of God is just there for human mirth and mockery and derision. And then we get to verse 4. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And I begin to ask the question today, if the Lord's song is in you, how can you not sing it in a strange land? Oh, I can understand not being willing to sing it in a way that allows everybody else to bring it into derision. I can fully understand being put on stage and being required to sing and refusing to because that method of singing the song does not honor the one who gave the song. No problem on that front. In fact, I would hail them as heroes for refusing to sing the songs of Zion in that position. Because those songs of Zion were precious songs. They were the gift of life, and they should not have been used in a way that would be seen as mockery in the world. They would give room for the world to look down on and mock them and their God. But We find out in verse 4 that that's not the main reason they hung their harps on the willows. And see, we can go through all of Scripture. You can look at Joseph when he's in prison in captivity. We can look at David when he's rejoicing and being given victory. We can look at David when he's in the depth of his sin. We can look at him when he's gone through and he's having to play Hamlet and act like he's insane because he's in the courts of his enemies. We can look at him when he's having to hide in the caves because his entire nation wants to kill him. We can look at all of the different descriptions of the highs and the lows and the captivity, and the song never ceases inside of a man who's dealing straight with his God. But they haven't been dealing straight with their God for a long time. So that song's not there. And so it's almost like you can hear even a song like that was sung for special music today. And you can appreciate it. You can even see how much passion there is in the singer for that song. You go, oh, there must be something real here because look how real it is to him. And, oh, he's a good singer because look at how well he's able to emote and get across what is real to him to me so that I can vicariously experience that thing that is real to him even though it's not quite that real to me. And we can appreciate as entertainment, and we can even be moved along to join in with somebody else's song. But when all that gets stripped away and I'm no longer able to be around the other person that is singing their song, there isn't any song in here. And so I get to the place where if I'm not going to publicly sing the songs because that's only going to lead to mockery, then I have nothing else to sing. Because all of the group songs that we sing, those aren't available to me anymore. So what other song is there for me to sing? Because, oh, those songs were for those Davids, for those singers. That we recognize that we are the people of God, but I've never actually interacted with him. I grew up in church all my life, and I've never actually I've been gone through the highs and the lows of riding the effects of everybody else's relationship with God. And that seems to have been enough until it wasn't, until it's not. So then they make this interesting promise. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem. Remember, they're walking away from Zion. They're seeing him in the background. And they're saying, if I forget, and this isn't something that is new to them. This had been prophesied to them over and over for decades, that there was 70 years of Babylonian captivity coming. And so if anybody had remembered any word, they know they're coming back. They know the work of God is not done and that he is going to bring them back after 70 years. He says, how shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. It's not just that I'm not going to sing the songs because the world will look at it and mock it, but while I refuse to let the world mock them, for the next 7 years of captivity, I'm going to be singing the song between me and my God, looking for and praying for the end of the promise of the restoration and the return. That wasn't there. They said, no, in 70 years, we're going to come back and we're going to pick up and we're going to sing all the songs that have been given to us by our ancestors that seem to never have really been ours. And, oh, look at the party we're going to have when we actually get to come back and we're going to get to sing the old songs again. But they don't seem to have ever been their songs. And so they say, if we forget, remove from us even the ability to play the music. Oh, the skill of the hands. That if I forget Jerusalem, let me even stop being able to play my instrument. If I forget Zion, let me even stop being able to sing whatsoever. It's just so that it's not that I've hung my harp on a willow tree. There's no more song to sing whatsoever. In our modern terminology, let's just describe it this way. If I find something that satisfies me at least as much as the things of God, remove from me all knowledge of even how to ask and seek for revival. Remove even the topic of revival. Forget that Holy Ghost stuff. Just take it all. If I find anything that is better to me than the promise of God, just take all of the expression of it away, all the experience of it away, so that it's not even an option. It's not even something that I would pursue anymore. And that's our setup for Esther. Esther 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this Ahasuerus which reigned even from India even unto Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. Talk about huge amount of land. Now when are we talking about? We're talking about 55 years after Cyrus has allowed his people to go back home. 55 years after the going from Babylon to Jerusalem. 2 generations of people that have been raised up in Babylonian, do you call it captivity, life, that has been chosen instead of returning to Jerusalem. This is 55 years after they had the chance. There's about, some would estimate that there's about 15 million people that when Cyrus said you can return to Jerusalem, didn't. That there was about 15 million people who had their life established, and instead of going back to Jerusalem and spending all that time to rebuild the temple, instead of reestablishing all of the tribal lands and growing the crops and fulfilling the feasts and growing and raising the cattle and all of the life that had been built before, and Solomon and David and all the way going back, instead of going back and rebuilding everything that God had promised and given them, they much preferred the way they had fit into society with their shops and their banks and all the different ways that they fit into Babylon society. They much preferred that, which is why Psalm 137 has to loom over this, because this is 55 years. Imagine when I'm 55, my daughter's going to be 26. We'll put that into context. She'll be 26. If I had been born when Cyrus said to leave, she would be 26 in verse 1. All right. So we've got 2 generations here of people who would have grown up in the world that they never should have been in. All right. And had no desire whatsoever to leave. They found something better. They didn't need the presence of God. They didn't need the good gifts of God, because it was good enough to be the people of God wherever they were. See, you can go through this entire book and realize that, yes, God's providence is good. God protects his people. God leads them towards an end. But for description's sake, God's in Jerusalem. God's everywhere. We know that. God's leading the providence, all this. God's taking care of his people. But for our purposes today, they're not in the presence of God. God's in Jerusalem and they're in Babylon. And Ahasuerus, if I remember my history right, that is a title and not a name. We believe this is Xerxes. If you go back into your history, I believe, if I get my Greek history right, this is either right before or right after the Battle of Thermopylae and the 300 Spartans and all of that. That's this time frame. And he does this interesting thing. So for the first 2 chapters, at least, we've just got this description of pagan life. Right? The entirety of this sets up the rules of the world, so to speak. If you've ever read any fantasy novels, then you know that half of it is you've got to learn the rules of the world, how everything operates, and the worst thing you can do is have a fantasy novel that builds up a world and then breaks its own rule. It sort of takes you out of it. You got to understand the way the system's working. All right. So for this first chapter, all it's doing is setting up the history and telling you the rules of the world. And so what's going on here is that he has a 6-month-long party. He sets up a feast where he brings all of the rulers, all of his underlings from all the provinces around, all of the important people, brings them into the feast and has a feast with them for 6 months. Now, we know that Solomon was rich, but you can't imagine how many millions of dollars is on display of what's going on here. And he's doing this for multiple reasons. One, because he is the king, so he's got to show that he's wealthy, he's the king. But also, he's got this desire to go and rule the world. So he's part of the East. If he's going to rule the world, he's got to conquer the West. So that's where the Battle of Thermopylae comes in, and going over and trying to defeat Greece, because he wants to rule the world. And if you're going to prove to your constituents that you have the ability to go and defeat Greece and rule the world, you got to show them that you have enough money in the coffers to actually provide an army and sustain an army through everything that's going to happen. So that's what we've got going on. We've got the idea of kings going to war. But before the kings go to war, they've got to prove that they have the ability to, so that all of his people will rally behind him and be secure in the fact that we're going to win this war because we're big. All right? And so what's going on is this showing off of the nation's wealth and his strength as a king. And we're just going to, it's a lot. So we'll get to verse 7. And they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse ones from another, and the royal wine in abundance according with the state of the king. There's a lot who would say that these are still the gold implements that should have been in Solomon's temple, that had never actually been returned. It says, and the drinking was according to the law, none did compel. For so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house, they should do according to every man's pleasure. It says, we go through just the rules of the world. No, we are beginning to look at the principles that are held highest. Obviously, we're starting off with might makes right. All right, we're talking about the biggest nation should win, and that if they have the ability to conquer and they choose to do so, that was their right to do so because they are the strongest nation, and the king has the right to expand his kingdom as much as he would want. But we've also got, as we go through, we see this description of, we can describe every man as a Horius. Every man as Xerxes, that the pinnacle of humanity is being in charge of oneself. That you might even describe this as the hyper-individualistic America, where it's your consent and your choice is all that matter, and it doesn't really matter which sin you get into or which sins you don't get into. It's irrelevant to the world which ones are which. It just matters that you're living your best life now, that you're in control, that you are the one that is able to decide what is going to be in your life and what is not going to be in your life. You could be a drunkard, or you can be a teetotaler and never have anything, and it's irrelevant as long as the one that's on the throne making the decision is you. Right? And so we've got this description of drinking and the drinking was according to the law, none did compel. That means the law was nobody could make you. The law was that whichever way you wanted to live, whichever way you wanted to party, whichever satisfaction of life you wanted to get, it was free to you to do, but nobody should be able to shame you for the choices that you make, and nobody should be able to force you to make choices that you don't want to make. You are free and at liberty to choose and decide whatever it is that you want. And this was one of the highest laws. And so they get drunk, and this party's been going on for a long time. At the end of this 6-month party, they had a 7-day bash. And during this 7-day bash, the king starts bragging about how beautiful his wife is, and has her summoned to show off how beautiful his wife is, and she quite rightfully refuses to come and be put on display for the entire 127 provinces about how beautiful this property of the king is, instead of the honor that the title of queen and a wife should possess. She's just the property that should be shown off. And she won't come. And in the middle of not being willing to come, all of the people start going, well, if he can't even control his wife, how is he going to win the war? If his own wife won't listen to him, why should we expect his generals to? Not only that, but if the king's wife won't listen to him, then when I get home, what's my wife going to do with me? She's going to look at me and says, well, the queen doesn't have to obey the king. I ain't obeying you. And so they get all riled. And the king's like, okay, what should I do? And he starts listening to all of his, the voices around him, and they say that this queen should be replaced, that it should not stand for the king to be disobeyed. And remember, we're putting in every man for Ahurius at this moment in time, that the only thing that's not acceptable is for what you say to not be accepted. Oh, go in and have a conversation with somebody where you're stating that they're just dare to tell somebody they're wrong. If you're feeling extra brave, do that in an internet chat room. Obviously, don't do that. You laugh because you know exactly what would happen. This is where we stand, that my word is law. And I understand that my word is law in my kingdom, and that your word is law in your kingdom, and our kingdoms have to sort of coexist, because I should not have to be compelled, and you should not have to be compelled, and it's a very confusing woke time. And so he listens. And he doesn't just divorce her. He doesn't just send her away. He makes it an official law of the land, both that she is not queen anymore, and all women must obey their husbands. All right? Not just the suggestion. He makes this the official law of the land. And so we have this. Oh, and then you have your post-drinking regret. That party's done, and he wakes up a couple days later, starts remembering what happened and what he did and the law that was made, and he starts regretting what he did. His beautiful wife is now gone, never allowed to be in his presence again. Even if he were to want her in his presence again, she could not be in his presence again, because in what was described in this time, the king was not above the law. And that should make everyone in here jealous to go back and live in ancient Babylon, to have rulers that were not above the law. They were actually subject to the law that they gave. We haven't gotten that level of wisdom in our nation yet. But so here he is. But this is world building. This is rules of the world that we're describing here. That the highest order is for every man to be able to be in charge of himself and not be compelled. And that once something's a law, it's a law. And there isn't anybody that can change it. It's going to happen. That once Queen Vashti was no longer allowed to be queen, then not even the king could bring her back in his own presence, no matter how much he wanted to. It was written in stone, and none, not even the king, can break the law. So we get our world building going on. Then we get to chapter 2. So if I read all this, we're going to be here all day, so I'm just going to describe it. Please read this on your own. He goes back and he has his regret. He wakes up probably very hungover, and he starts missing his wife. I don't know how much he misses her as much as he misses his beautiful possession. No, but he gets some recommendations to go and to have a beauty contest so that his beautiful possession might be replaced with the most beautiful possession of the land. And I describe it that way because that's exactly the way the attitudes were about it at that time, which should drive all of us nuts, because we can go through the description of the book of Ruth and we can see the romance between Boaz and Ruth. We can go through the Song of Solomon and we can see how Solomon romances Uriah. We can apply that to God the Father and Israel and how he fought for them and he gave and he romanced them. We can carry that even further in history to Jesus and the church and how he gave himself. We can look at all of these different romances that describe real passion and real affection and the way that this a man-woman thing is supposed to be. And then we get all the way into the pagan kingdom, and that's been boiled all the way down to a beauty contest so he can pick out the prize that he wants. Has nothing to do with her. Whoever her is we know is going to be Esther, but no, has nothing to do with Esther. And fundamentally has everything to do with he likes the way she looks. And it's frustrating is the word I keep coming back to, because we've got the beauty of romance, and we're looking at a people who are 55 years beyond their return to Jerusalem. And all of these rules of the world that I'm describing is what Israel has chosen above the goodness of God. This is the lifestyle, this is the society, these are the rules of the world that Israel has chosen to stay in instead of, they fundamentally for 2 generations now chosen, we'd rather have the romance of a man and his possession than the romance of a Ruth and a Boaz, or the romance of Solomon and the Shibbolite woman. Or we would rather just the type of relationship where you get what you want out of me and I'll get what I want out of you, and we'll coexist and we'll try to do each other as little harm to each other as possible while getting what we want out of each other. That has been chosen above and beyond all of the affection, passions, and love that come with being the people of God. And so as they set up this beauty contest, then what happens in chapter 3 should have happened in chapter 2. I'm going to skip around. I'm going to assume y'all know the outlines of the story. And in chapter 3, we have this situation where Haman is requiring everybody to bow down to him, and Mordecai the Jew will not. Well, that should have happened here. Esther should have gotten the word that there's a beauty contest to be the winner is going to be the queen, and all of the runner-ups are going to become his concubines, and should have stood up and said no. For two main reasons. One, she's a Jew, and there should be no mixing. There's no intermarrying. He's no pagan. He is there's no way that if this was not king and subject, if this was just man and woman, he would have been off limits. He would not have been someone that she can marry because he wasn't Jewish. It was outside of the faith. It was outside of the covenant that this would have been an unlawful marriage. So just then, just based off of that, she should have said, I'm not going and getting here. I'm not going to be the concubine or even the wife of Ahurias. That is beneath her. But even beyond that, how do you describe this? Past couple Sunday nights, you've seen pictures of bathing suits and the degradation of morals in a society. Here we've got the description of what is understood to be the most beautiful woman in the city. And joining a beauty contest is slumming it for her. Being lifted up, being shown to be the most beautiful girl in all of the city, so much so that the king would desire her to be her husband, is slumming it for a child of the king. And that the best position the world can offer should be the least valued among all of God's people. And again, I'm going to keep harping on this, 2 generations. How long has it been? I can't remember if it was 72 or 76 when Asbury was. That we're at 55 years. We're at this. We're at 2 generations since America's even known any idea of what a revival was, let alone how to look or seek for it, or even to desire it, or know what it is to desire it. This is how far away we are from it. And so here she is. She could have gone back and studied and known all of the Song of Solomon, all of Ruth, all the real romances, but all of the passions and affections of being a godly woman just get pushed to the side for the better position of being recognized for her beauty. And how hard it would have been back then. How do I want to say this? You've got this description you've had on Sunday nights of the degradation of the morals, and there is a very clear distinction between the 1920s and the 1960s about what was there. Do you know just basic little facts that in order to get from the full cover to they'd be conservative bikinis now. No, but do you know how they made those popular? They had to go out and hire strippers to do it because nobody else would. But as soon as it was on the magazines, then it was fine. Yes. As soon as it was on the magazines, it was even to be desirable and celebrated, when nobody would have done that had they not gone and paid the nightlife to do it for them. No, there had to be a purposeful tearing down of the morals. All right. What I want to take that description and flip it on its head and bring it out that it's harder to show a girl her worth beyond the physical looks than it was for them to destroy it then. That the idea of modesty, the idea of a woman's beauty being based off of how she is loved and taken care of and exalted has been replaced for just how she looks. Right. And to go back and to try to teach the other one after multiple generations of that fall. I mean, look at where Esther was. Everybody would have envied to be in Esther's place. And she should have seen it as something that was fundamentally beneath her. Oh, what's the fairy tale? Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Well, why was fair important? Fair was not that it was description of she made good judgments. Fair meant light-skinned. Fair, and that she wasn't out. Fair meant that she had been kept indoors or protected, valued enough to be taken care of. So the one that was fairest in all the land was not somebody that had been born being able to win all of the beauty pageants, but she was born into a family that loved her so much that took care of her as if she was the most important person in the world. That love is set upon and carried through, but that she was the fairest of them all, was the most beautiful because she was the most adored. Not the most adored because she was the most beautiful. And because of the love being set upon the person, it exalted and magnified their beauty. But the world's turned that way around, so that we take what beauty was started out with and take it for ourselves, instead of seeing that gift that was given, so we heap affection upon it. It's been turned around backwards, and to try to teach that their value is exalted and being loved but no, I'd rather be looked at like this other person's looked at. And so Esther just joins up. And not only that, but she took a spa year. We all get jealous of that. No, she basically spent her time in a spa for a year to take what was beautiful and to try to make it even more pleasing before going into this beauty contest. And she wins. And for sake of time, we'll just skip story. There's a plot to kill the king. That because of her newfound position as queen, she can take Mordecai's word for it and let the king know. And the king, because of Mordecai and because of Esther, the king's life is saved and spared. But there's one important thing that Mordecai told her. She said, never let him know you're a Jew. Never let him know. And as we read the word, we can find out that was the providence of God. But that doesn't mean that it was the right decision. And doesn't even mean it was coming from a good place. It just means God took their wickedness and turned it around and used it for his ends and his glory. And that's how providence is twisted nowadays, because we think, well, if it's something that God used, it must have been good. No, God can use your sin as much as he can use your obedience, because he's pushing this towards his end. You didn't make it happen. But here it is that they've decided that in order to get and keep what they want, they must not let it know they're the people of God. They must keep the fact that they are God's people, and keep that hidden. You can just be Christian around certain people. That you can come into church and you can have your songs you can sing. You can go out there and you can maybe wear a little cross necklace, but make sure it's tucked in. And whenever you're around the right people and they've said the right code word, you can, God bless, or whatever. And you can say, yep, I believe him too. And you can hush hush. That's all it is. And we move on. And you can just know, yep, you're another one. And we're just sort of all hidden. There's no, I am the people of God. And there is no song, there's no passion, there's no affection, because there is no ongoing relationship between the people of God and God. Again, for our sake, for our description, God's not here. God's in Jerusalem. Again, that's be facetious to go that far because he's everywhere. He's providence. But they're outside the will of God because they never returned. And not only did they not return, they purposed to stay and exalted all of these rules of the world building that I described. They exalted that. They preferred that. How did it say it in Psalms? Not just if I forget thee, but if I prefer not Jerusalem above my chiefest joy. This life in the world had become their chiefest joy. They were special people of God, but living in the world, and they preferred living in the world to being the people of God. And so all of their choices, all the positions they put themselves into was to maintain the ability to see themselves as the people of God, but to integrate with the world as much as possible. And so this whole revival thing, it's not even an issue. It's more, now we're getting into just the morals of it. Should I do this thing? Or should I not do that thing? No, is this a sin? Or is this not a sin? Is this acceptable or is this not acceptable? And the world looks at you and thinks you're insane. Because why? Because the rule of the world is the drinking was according to the law. None did compel. You don't want to do that sin? Fine, don't do that sin. Who cares if it's a sin or not? You don't have to do it. There is no problem according to the world. You don't want to do that thing because you think it's wrong? Fine. You're still part of us. You're still one of us. You don't want to do that thing. We want to do that thing. It's all good. It's all up to my conscience versus your conscience. So we just got to get along and tolerate and accept everybody. And I'll accept your desire not to do it. You accept my desire to do it. And we're all happy. There is no conflict from the world's perspective looking at this. But there is everything lost from the perspective of God's people looking in. And so he says, don't tell. Hide the fact that you're the people of God. Don't live in a way that would give any indication. Don't speak in a way that would give any indication. No, don't tell anybody. Keep it hidden. Oh, I'm sure there was quite a bit of anti-Semitism or anti-Christian sentiment around, but not enough to justify this. All right, so jumping ahead. We've got our world building. We've got one more. I'm going to tell this one out of order just to help build the world. No, we know our laws is to every man's conscience is his own. And we know the law is that once it's a law, the king is bound to it. That the law rules all. Right? And once we found that the one law that was made that rules all is, if you're not summoned to the king, you will die if you try to get in his presence. Right? This is, the way they say it is, if you're not summoned and you enter into the presence of the king, he would have to raise his scepter in order to forgive your crime, so that you would not be immediately put to death for daring to enter into the king's presence. And there were multiple reasons for this. One was for security. You got to keep the king alive. But the primary reason for that was that was the pragmatic excuse for the law. The real reason for the law was that if you want to present yourself as a god, you must be separate from all of the people, so that there is that veil of mystery between you and them, so that others can see you through the lens of myth, through the lens of story, through the lens of all of the ways he's described, and never actually engage him, so they can elevate his status just from mere king to being God King. And that was part of what he wanted. He had this image of being the God King. And part of the way he did that was making sure everybody had to stay far away from him. Sort of like everybody wasn't allowed into the Holy of Holies because they would be killed if they went in. This was the same on the world, that if the people would enter into the presence of the king and the king hadn't invited them, then it meant death. It elevated the lore of the king. It elevated the distinction between you and him, and it automatically made it so that you were the weak little peon that could not dare challenge or even set foot in the presence of the king, the anti-holy, as a description. And so, but we've got that description, but remember, Xerxes is a human. He's a person. He isn't God. He's just a man. So our descriptions are that the law is final. What you want to do is up to you. And the goal of the human, the goal of the person, is to be able to keep everybody else as far enough away from them as they are comfortable with, so that you can do and say and believe and want anything that you want. It's destruction to us, but we've seen in the past couple of years how people don't talk to each other anymore. Everybody's online, and we have the fake conversations because it's all online and everything, but everybody's gone in their own kingdoms and separated in their own bubble worlds. And that's what that's the lifestyle that Ahurius has set up. Everybody's a king of their own bubble world. And if anybody dare bring anything into your own personal bubble that you don't like, off with their head. That you are strict ruler, and you see the level of hostility in people if you were to dare just enter in their world and tell them something that contradicts what they believe. All of a sudden, just the anger, all the hostility, and it's just right there. Well, that is the pinnacle of what a man should be, according to the worldly philosophy, and the way it is that it should be there. We should be governed by the law. Forget grace, forget affection. That others can be seen as property. There's no affection, and it's entirely I should be able to rule. And then something happened. I can't go through it without describing a little bit of Joseph. You've got Mordecai. Haman comes in and has been given the authority of the king. Wants everybody to bow to him. Mordecai won't. And we finally get Mordecai acting like a Jew, acting like God's people. I will not worship anybody else other than my God. I will send my adoptive daughter to be the concubine of the king. I will take all this affection that I put on my adoptive daughter, and I will just remove that and try to make her as pretty as possible so the world will like her as much as possible. I'll sacrifice the next generation for peace. But finally, we're going to get a spiritual backbone and say that far, but no farther. And because he dares to speak up and actually dares to have the gospel on his lips, you might say, it is off with his head, because it's broken all the laws that we've already established in the rulemaking. And so Haman goes through, and with the authority of the king, makes a law. Remember, in our rules, laws cannot be broken even by the king. Right? This law is that all Jews are supposed to be put to death. 15 million people, supposedly on a single day, were supposed to be killed. And they cast lots, or they cast Purim. They cast lots to decide what day it was that all of Jews were going to be killed. And he sent all of his riders through 127 provinces all over the east, nailing up the law on the wall. So everybody knew, every Jew knew, every non-Jew knew that in 12 months' time, on the 15th of Adar, then 15 million Jews are going to be slain in the streets. And what happens? Mordecai goes into sackcloth and ashes. he starts weeping. And as we'll go through this, we may not go through it all today, we find out that in the entire book, until deliverance comes, there is nothing other than mourning and woe. Well, you might say, okay, but Pastor, they're being told that in 12 months, 15 million people are going to be killed. Isn't that enough to justify mourning and woe? Oh, yes. But nowhere in here is prayer ever said. Not only is the name of God never mentioned, prayer is never mentioned. Because you can't mention prayer without the name of God, because prayer is a conversation with somebody. You can't make prayer to God and not mention God. So it's not. So the closest we get to prayer in this book is fasting. The closest we get to a relationship with God from the people's perspective, of people communicating with God, the closest thing we get to that is the self-immolation and harming yourself and trying to get God to do something on our behalf. That's the height of the worship that we get in this book. Now, that's not warranted, but that's the height of it. It doesn't go beyond that. They no longer know how to play. They no longer know how to sing because their chief joy has replaced Jerusalem in their hearts. Their chief joy, they appreciate the things of God, but real life. Things of God, real life. And they appreciate real life and the satisfaction more than they appreciate the things of God. So much so that they appreciate the real world without the things of God more than they appreciate the promise of God with the presence of God. The people of God would rather not have the presence of God and be in the world than to be in the presence of God and have Him with Him. All right, so chapter 4. When Mordecai perceived that all this was done, this is not special spiritual discernment. This is he read the thing on the wall. Don't think perceiving, oh wow, this was a godly man. No, he read the law. It was told to him. When Mordecai perceived all that was done, he rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry, and came even before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. In every province whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. And Esther, being the good Jew that she was, knowing that she had been put in the king's house for a reason, because everything works out for good for those who love him, and God's in control and God has a plan for your life. Now all of these, because she was in the house of the king, then she rose up and go, oh, I'm going to fight this injustice and we're going to take care of it, and I'm going to proclaim the name of God, and this is going to be changed. No. She goes to Mordecai and goes, stop that mourning. Stop. Take off the sackcloth and ashes and put your normal clothes back on. You're embarrassing me. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came out and told her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved. Why? Not because of the law. And she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. What's this sorrow over sin thing happening? What's this? We've finally gotten to the place where the sin was just too much, and the consequences are right at your door, and we finally got some tears. 55 years after they should have left, they finally got some tears. And Esther wants to turn the tap off. She wants him to no longer worry. Why does she not want Mordecai to worry? Well, I'll just read down. Let's see. Oh, okay. So he tries. She tries to get him to stop. He says no. And then she's finally like, okay, well, fine. Tell me why you're mourning. You'd think the person that raised you, that would have been the first question. But no, finally gets there. So he gives her a copy of the law, lets her know what's going on. And that's verse 8. And he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, and show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king and make supplication for him, and to make request before him for her people. That, hey, the king is just, through Haman, just declared that all of us are going to be killed in a day. And Esther spake unto Hattach, and gave him the commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come into the king, into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to who the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. What do you want me to do about it? You want me to risk my life? And Mordecai just sort of touches the entire point of why we've gone through all of that history, we've gone through all that description, we've gone through all of that scripture and word to set up to show you what the world is like and the attitude of the world and how it hates the presence of God. It hates everything that would dare stand up to it and say, no, this is the word of the Lord. In fact, Haman in later chapters will actually say, I am, except for the king, I'm the ruler of the free world. I have everything that I want. Everything that I say, it's going to be done. Everything that I want, it's going to be given to me. I have this huge house. I am, with the exception of the king, I'm this ruler, the greatest person in the land. And it's not enough because Mordecai won't bow to me. And that's the end result of all of the world. They could have everything, and it won't be enough because Jesus will not bow to the King of the earth. And so that raises the question, what is it in you that would be willing to bow and give up everything? Everything. 55 years past the time when there was the presence of God in these people's life. And they would be willing to give it up to be told that she was pretty. But in the middle of it all, there was this deception that just came over. There's this deception that because she was the queen, she wasn't going to be put to death. There's this idea that, and it's in the heart of every man, it's in the heart of every woman, heart of every child, that no matter how much they mentally know it, they fundamentally do not believe that the law applies to them. It applies to everybody else. It doesn't apply to me. And even if the law applies to me, the consequence for breaking the law is going to be given to everybody else, but it's not going to be given to me. Yeah, verse 12, they told Mordecai Esther's words, and then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all of the Jews. You think that you've ingratiated yourself with the world enough that they appreciate you and value you enough that you're not going to have the same consequences as everybody else. That it's time for you to stand up and actually follow through with the word of the Lord. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, this is the word for the church. We're not in history making time. Now, we're not describing a history. We're describing what's necessary for the church, because the church has not stood up and sought the presence of God. Indeed, they've not even looked back for the methods of seeking God. They've not even gone back to the old past to say, okay, if we want revival, what is necessary from us to actually even ask for it? How do we ask for it in a way that God will actually hear that this is what we're asking for? Well, are you still just wanting to have a good experience? Well, no, that's going to be mocked and derided by the world. That's not good enough. Do you have a song? If all of the rest of the world stopped talking if you were alone just by yourself, like you are when you wake up in the morning, like you are when you go throughout the day, I don't have to ask what do you do when you're alone, as if you don't know, because you're always alone. And this world is designed, is fundamentally designed so that we each live our own separate life away from each other. When nobody's there, when you're not in church, do you have a song? Is it there? Do you have something to sing? Do you have a reason to sing? If thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, you will not escape. Now, don't mistake this. God's word will come true. If thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. God's not going to let 15 million people die in a single place. Oh, and the history of this book is amazing. There's even the description that people believe that the way the book is written actually prophesies the end of the Nazis in 1946. That it's actually written into the language, the timing of when all this would be repeated in our age. So this is not just a then thing, this is a now thing. God's word is true. His blood is sufficient, and everything that he said is going to come to pass. Not a single drop of the word is going to go by without being fulfilled. Not a single jot or tittle. But just because in the grand scheme of things, in the overarching history, God's word is going to win, does not mean that you will. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. God is on the throne. He will win. His word is coming true. He will take care of his own. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. I'll give the irony here. Her parents are already dead, and he's her godfather. He's her adoptive father. Thou and thy house. He's saying if you don't stand up, then not only are you going to die, but the closest thing you have to a righteous generation is going to die too. You see, because at least Mordecai, I used my example of the 55 years, that if I had been born when Cyrus made the decree, I would be 55 years old at this time. No, time's passed, I would be closer to 60 at this moment. No, but Mordecai was older than that. He was taken captive out of Jerusalem as one of the last hauls of people out of Jerusalem. So he still remembered Jerusalem. Mordecai still knew. Mordecai still had, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let the tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. He remembered. He remembered what it was like. And yet still he had loved the world enough to sacrifice his adoptive daughter to it until it went too far, which was way farther than it should have, but at least for him it went too far when it was worship Haman over God. And he finally, something came up, and there's a quickening, there was an enlightening. It said, it's gone too far, there's too much sin, I've sacrificed too much, we're not sacrificing anymore. I will stand, let God be God and let every man be a liar. And the church needs this quickening moment. The church needs to realize that everything it's doing is not just not obeying God, but it is actually functioning the way the world says to function. Even if you are pro-life and anti-LGBT, that is still functioning the way the world functions, because it is written by a law that you should live by your own conscience. Do your own, saying laws I don't want to say. No, that is, do your own will, do your own heart, to your own heart be true. To the God of forces is just running rampant. And we think that because we live by the God of forces more righteously, that we're not living by the God of forces. No, we're living by the God of forces just in a way that looks more righteous. Don't think that if you don't actually stand up, if you don't actually deal with your God, and you don't actually obey your God, don't think that the law is not going to come down on you. Who are you to think that when you die, there's going to be no judgment? Who are you to think that all of it applies to everybody, but not you? For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then there shall an enlargement and a deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. God is good, providence is happening, the promise is going to be fulfilled. But at what cost to you? Oh, look around how the church has shrunken over the past decades. Yeah. We can go through and, well, there's some music from the 90s that I like. But even the best Christian music from the 90s is only really good because in the middle of all of the fame, fortune, look at me, we can be like the world, other Christian music that was out there. There are a select few who had the ability to emote what was actually going on in them. And that's the height of what the church has to offer the world now, is simply the ability to emote what was going on in them. And the church doesn't realize that the best the church has to offer apart from God is the same thing that the world has to offer, except for they do it better. Yeah. The world emotes better. The world expresses what's going on better. The world has a stronger grasp of ethics, of morals, of what it means to be a good man. They got a stronger grasp of that because they're not putting on airs. They're just being them. As it's been years at this point, where it's almost 60 years since Cyrus, and so that would have been 70 years from the captivity. We're 100-something years away from the beginning of the judgment, and there's still no sincerity here. But finally, when they had that one step too far, and that quickening rose up, and Mordecai said, "No farther." He had to go to Esther and said, "Esther, the one that I sacrificed to the pagan god of Ahurius, of Xerxes, your value is in whose you are, and not in all the things that humans appreciate about you, your looks." So Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer: "Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. If I die, at least I will die righteous, standing up for my God." Something that should have been happening for the past 60 years. That had they been doing that, had they valued everything, then they wouldn't even be here. See, this entire situation should never have happened because they should be building the temple back in Jerusalem. The loss of the presence of God in the world should never have happened because the church should have never entered the world the way that it did. Oh, we can go back through and how it's happened in politics and how it's happened in morals and how it's we can look at all the societal ways that it functionally happened. But at the end of the day, it boils down to this: the hearts of men preferred other things to the presence of God. And preferring other things to the presence of God puts you in the position where judgment will happen quickly. And now it's part of the church's job to go to every lost man, woman, and child and go, don't think that you're going to escape the judgment that's at hand. The judgment is sure. The judgment is happening. Do not think that you will escape. For it's appointed once for every man to die, and then the judgment. The law is sure. The law is not going anywhere. God's not changing the law. The king is not changing the law. Your king is not changing the law. Your king sent his son to fulfill the law so that you might be saved, you and your house. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed if you don't stand up. I believe God's got another harvest. The question is this church, the church that's around even outside of these walls, is it going to be a part of it? Or is God going to start preaching through some rocks?
Thank you so much for joining us for this video message. We do hope it's been a blessing for you. Again, we invite you to reach out to us with specific prayer requests. We invite you to reach out to us, especially if the Lord has shown you that you are lost and you've prayed to be saved. We'd love to be a continuing blessing to you in your walk with the Lord. So please do reach out to us. We are open to emails, we're open to text messages, we're open to phone calls. And we do have a brand new location. We're excited to be in Paughtown, North Carolina, and if you are close to that area especially, we'd love to meet you in person. So please do reach out to us, and we would love to be help to you in planning your visit. And again, help us to continually reach people with these messages. If they're a blessing to you, please feel free to share them with friends, with family, with co-workers, with neighbors, with anyone who's right around you. Please do feel free to share these messages. And thank you again for listening, and may the Lord richly bless you.